Okay, so yeah, so it's my great pleasure to hear what Paul and Richard share with us, and it gave me the opportunity to think about the issue, and so it gave me I guess I'm going to narrow down the topic a little bit. It's still very wide, but I'm going to talk about the relation between the digital technology and the future of globalization, and so probably provide some input from a practitioner economist point of view. Now, so I think it's beneficial to first start to define what is globalization, and it provides us a broader perspective. So it's not just about trade, I believe. It's also about in nature, the degree of interaction and cooperation among the people, companies, governments globally, all the stakeholders. And if we look at the past decades, so because of the environment, the WTO, the rules stuff, and I think one important factor is that, as Paul pointed out, is that the speed of globalization has accelerated in the past more than 30-some years, and partly thanks to the technology, information and communication, which deepens the collaboration and the breadth of the market. And so that's the big picture. And so my big picture conclusion would be that I believe from what I reading the both presenters' slides and what they talk, the big picture is that the force of the technological progress will continue to facilitate interaction and cooperation and the globalization. This is the big picture. But then I'm going to focus on the 3 points. The first is that I think is if we look at what's happening for the digital technology, e-commerce domestically, we believe that it's going to be something similar will happen globally, but with some difference. And so there was, for example, and so it has some special interesting features, becomes more inclusive, and also, but I think the B2B business will continue to be important because of the cultural and the language difference. And so that is the comment on global trade. The second comment on the role of technology is that that part I think I'm a bit more on the side of Paul's side. That is, I believe that it's unlikely either digital technology or automation will reduce trade, global trade. The last point is that it's very much echoing what Richard said, is that we believe that the digital technology is changing the traditional boundary of the tradable and non-tradable intermediary component and the rise of the service. So let me first talk about the first point. If you look at what's happened in the domestically, because the globally, if we think about it, it's really a bigger scope of the collaboration. But domestically, what happened is really the digital technology has fundamentally changed the boundary of the trade. As the left panel, as you can see, is the average distance between the buyers and sellers. It's in China on Taobao.com is on average is about 1,000 kilometers. So that is obviously fundamentally from the traditional trades. And also, if you look at on the right graph shows that the average distance for most of the goods is still increasing. So that is the first point. Is really technology transforming the boundary of the markets, and we believe the same thing is happening globally. But then there's some difference. One important difference, I believe, is that the B2B, so it's not just the customers directly participate paying, but the business to business still continue to play an important role. So this is as you can see, the numbers of the proportion of the B2B trade among the e-commerce, that includes the domestic and global trade. And that is still a very important component. And even in China, as you can see, the B2B portion is much smaller, thanks to the China has a very, the largest, probably the e-commerce market right now in China. But so that what I'm trying to say here is that we can see that technology will broaden the boundary of the markets. That will happen at the global level, but B2B will continue to be a role. especially in the cross-border because of the different language and culture things. So that is a trend. Technology will promote the global trade, but then B2B will continue to be important. So and also it becomes much more inclusive. So that is different from the driven by the traditional multinational corporations. Now is we have many more smaller players that are able to participate, that are supported by the platforms will becomes a much bigger role for the coordination of this. That is different from the traditional drivers by the multinational corporations. And in talking about B2B, as I'm going to give you the Alibaba.com as example, it's probably the largest B2B cross-border the market in the world. And so besides connecting a lot of small business to the globally, what it does is to provide a lot of infrastructure abilities, such as matching the buyers and sellers, and helps them to do the marketing and provide some infrastructures. One example, for example, is let's say the language. So it actually can translate the more than 100 languages instantly globally among many of the countries. It actually helps to promote, etc. So that is you can see that the platforms are playing a role that makes the global trade much more inclusive. That is something different. Another thing digital technology is changing is not just platforms, also because of the brand. Shein is the Chinese upcoming brand. And actually, it is really trying, as a brand, is trying to shorten the supply chain, is to organize the Chinese supply chain to provide the goods to the customers in the Western world. It seems pretty popular. And as you can see that it's the technology is streamlined the supply chain domestically and globally. So that is the role of the digital technology is happening on the trade right now. Now, the second point is that I believe it's unlikely that it's either digital technology or the automation is going to reduce the trade. I'm giving you a couple of examples to collaborate to spur our debate here. So the last panel shows is that actually automation in industrial countries has boosted imports from the developing countries. You can see that the ones rose bigger, actually the ones that are much more automated. The right panel is the relation between the robot dependency and the labor share. There's no negative trend as far as can see. If you look at across countries, it's like the ones that has higher automation is like the future of the less ones. You can see that it's clear there's no negative relation. So I think, and logically, it shouldn't be the case. Actually, logically, it could promote much more intermediary collaboration, as probably suggested by Richard. So, so this is one example from eBay study. You can see that when the translation machine is happened to the Latin American market, actually it dramatically increased the trade rather than reducing the trade. So my point is that, as Pol suggested, that the technological advance actually promotes a lot of the intermediaries or the new opportunities. Now, the last point then is that the rise of the service and the private intermediary component, as suggested by Richard, and so that is I think it's really important trend. It's not
we cannot hear you, Long.
Service providers. I'm going to give you several examples. So one is the Apple. So in Apple, actually, it's not just the smartphone, but on top of that, actually, can you still hear me? Yeah. So on top of actually, you can see that about 40% of the downloads of the Apple's app, the Apple stores, actually from the small business and the new apps from outside of the the home countries. So you can see that it's really the combination of the manufacturing goods and a lot of the service becomes much more possible. And more examples like Facebook. Facebook have it's probably the largest social media platform. As you can see, it provides actually the digital service as the infrastructure. But on top of that, there's a lot of local participation from the laborers, from a lot of the startups, from peoples, participate. So that's combination. That's why I think it's useful to have a broader definition of what is the globalization anyway. The Meta is another example. Obviously, it's a huge, about 50% of more than 50% of its revenue actually from another countries. That's another way to show that service becomes an increasingly important part of the global of the global trade. And so, but my final point is that so my big picture is that the technology actually, it's in logic, it promotes the trades because it promotes more collaboration, and in many forms, it might not just show up in the trade numbers. It's meant with that, and digital technology is really accelerating that. But in the meantime, it requires new rules of collaboration. So some examples, for example, we need to have the privacy and the data protection rules, and for example, other things like the current requirement, like the environmental issues. So that requires we have the more rules to have the similar standards for the trade. Those are the things that are changing. Also, supply chains, because of the geopolitical reasons, it actually also is affecting the globalization. But I think picture-wise, the logic of the globalization is not stopping, and the technology is providing such preparators. So let me conclude. I think I would like to emphasize that when we think about the globalization, it's not just think about the trade numbers, the volumes. It's in a broader sense, it's really about the interaction and cooperation among the peoples globally. And I'm talking about 3 points. The first point is that technology is really reshaping it has shattered the traditional so-called gravity model of the global trade, domestic and globally. But I think B2B is still playing a more important role, especially globally. And I think that because of technology, the global trade has become much more inclusive. It's not just big players. That's my first point. The second point, that I don't believe that either digital technology or the automation is likely to reduce the trade. I provide some evidence. And finally, I believe that the digital technology is breaking the traditional boundary between the tradable and non-tradable. It leads to more intermediary components and leads to the rise of the service trade. And finally, we also need to have the new rules that can help propel such the driver of this technology to make the digital dividends to be shared globally. Thank you.
Thank you.